Hello everyone, and I am back again. This video that I'm doing has to do with some of the things that I've been noticing and I've been paying close attention to. And if you haven't, I am here to kind of enlighten you on an opinionative video of what I have been witnessing. First of all, I noticed this protest in Hong Kong, and it used to say Free HK, Hong Kong, Democracy Now, and Hong Kong is now protesting, wants to continue protesting to regain steam of their protest. And so the demonstrators chanted pro-democracy slogans in a luxury mall in Hong Kong on Wednesday. This was the latest in a string of small but determined protests as the city's coronavirus outbreaks start slowing down. So more than 100 protesters have gathered at lunchtime in the landmark of Atrium Mall in Central, a prestigious business and retail district, despite the social distancing rules to prohibit public gatherings for more than 4 people at a time. And so I'm going to stop. What I've known and I'm learning is that there's a lot of restrictive and strict measures in some of these Asian countries. And even with the people that are native to these countries, I notice there's a lot of restrictions, some you wouldn't even believe. Because every city, every state, every country, every town, every wherever has their own ways of dealing with different political issues. And when you're talking about China, Hong Kong, and all these other places like that, what I've learned is that some of the restrictions or the politics are very militant, very homogenous. In other words, everything has to be one way. It has to be the same belief. And if you go against that belief or you go against that policy, you're heavily punished. And so what I've been noticing, even before the pandemic, there was protests that were just breaking out all over Hong Kong. And now I'm noticing it's still happening. And so it almost raises a red flag. Here's the thing I wanted to add is that when this pandemic happened, it happened as early as 2019. Some say even earlier than December. And that there was a woman doctor who had alerted about the seriousness of the virus possibly getting out or have gotten out, and the seriousness of it infecting multiple people, and then she somehow disappeared or vanished. And then there was this male doctor who actually was, quote unquote, they say a whistleblower, and he tried to alert the population in print. And he tried to let people know that this virus was released somehow and that it was really serious and that it multiplies rapidly and it can go from one person to another person. And it's really crazy. And so last night I was looking, I'm going to jump around here. So last night I was looking at a news segment, and I believe it might have been ABC. And what I heard, and it was very brief, is that, which is scary to me, and I'm going to say this, is that, and I heard it again this morning from President Donald Trump. He briefly mentioned it when he was addressing, I guess, a briefing, or he was signing what is, I guess, Seniors Month, for seniors to recognize the seniors. And they were talking about how they were going to lay out, I guess, a seniors recognition and some policies, I guess, that are beneficial to seniors. So he mentioned that there was some issues with this virus, and that he was wondering if it was an accident or if someone might have done this on purpose. He mentioned that very briefly. He said, "I don't know," quote unquote. I'm paraphrasing what he said. And the way he said it, it almost is like he's giving a clue, but not really giving the clue. He doesn't really come out and say it. And he says China doesn't want to say. And lately he's been saying China doesn't want any of the American scientists or people to go over there to study, people that are good with studying infectious diseases or that can go to the laboratories to find out what's going on, how this thing may have gotten out. And that China is being very secretive again. Like they didn't really want to release the numbers of deaths, and they were saying, they as in the news and people who were covering, if you didn't watch it, there was a tracker that was tracking the numbers of people who were dying or the numbers of people who are cases that had contracted the virus. And so they're saying that China was being really secretive, and Donald Trump said it very briefly, and more than once he said this, that he's not really trusting that some countries are giving the correct numbers, which I agree with that. I don't believe that we're getting all of the correct numbers of just how many people died in some of these other countries. And which brings me back to this article here. It says Hong Kong protests continue to regain steam. So this is by a Zen So out of the Associated Press. And it says these demonstrators chanted pro-democracy slogans in a luxury mall in Hong Kong on Wednesday, and the latest in a string of small but determined protests as the city's coronavirus outbreaks is starting to slow. So more than 100 protesters gathered at lunchtime in a landmark. It's a mall called the Landmark Atrium in Central, a prestigious business and retail district, despite social distancing rules. And their distancing rules is to prohibit public gatherings of more than 4. So they sang a protest anthem, Glory to Hong Kong, and held signs reading Free Hong Kong, Revolution Now, Hong Kong Independence. And so, which brings me back to what I was saying in some of these other countries, the freedoms that Americans usually have are not the way this has been going always in these other countries. And right now, there are protesters that are in Michigan and in some other places that want the country opened up because they don't want these lockdowns or shutdowns, because governors and mayors have closed beaches, they've closed businesses for fear that the numbers of cases of people getting the virus is going to grow again, and it'll start all over again with a high concentration of people catching the virus and more deaths, because there isn't yet a vaccine that is ready and available to people so that it can help them stay alive, so to speak. So they're in fear that it can affect a lot more people, kill off a lot more people, and some people are feeling that they'd rather open things up in a slow phase. Some people say open things up now because their mortgage, their rent, their bills their livelihood, all is contingent upon this economy, which is really suffering behind a lot of these people that have filed unemployment in these lockdowns or shutdowns, however you want to say this is. So this article here in Hong Kong is what I'm looking at, says that they want revolution now. They want independence now. So it sounds like even before this pandemic, there wasn't a lot of freedoms that people in these countries had. And so we're just now kind of experiencing something because of this virus and the fear of this virus spreading again. And there's mixed messages. And also what I've noticed, I'm going to lay this out here, is that some people have expressed that they're getting more money from unemployment than they would their jobs. And they're afraid to go back to work because they're afraid that they'll be like some of these frontline workers who, some of them have had to leave their jobs because they went out there, they were worried about their rent and bills, and they ended up contracting it. There's been a lot of inequality financially, and, people are worried about being evicted. People are worried about being homeless, which we already had a lot of homelessness before the pandemic. And so there's been a lot of racial issues that have been long fought, and it's a battle that continues on, and now it's involving the financial end of it. And so in this country here, sounds like they're having their own issues. And what is scary to me is that we're not really being told all of what's going on. We're hearing about one country and how they want to, ask questions about how this virus came to be. And then we're hearing in the news about how certain people are being discriminated in these countries and how they're being mistreated in these countries, whether they're from Africa or whether they're people who are native of this country. And now we're seeing that they're starting to gain steam again with these protests in Hong Kong, saying revolution now and Hong Kong independence. And we're going to have a protest here in California and Philadelphia and New York on Friday. There's supposed to be recognition of renters and people who are homeowners that can't pay their rent and mortgage. And they're expected that once this rent freeze and this moratorium is up at the end of May for some people, and already now for others, that you're expected to pay the back rent before this pandemic hit. And during the pandemic, when you got laid off from your job, you're expected to pay that rent or that mortgage, which you couldn't because you were off work. Your job shut down because there were executive orders stating that your job had to close because of the pandemic. So in this article, it's saying that one protester hung a banner cursing Hong Kong police and their families. So the protester had claimed that, I guess his anger, he calmed down previously because of the coronavirus, but now we must step up. He said, "Let the world know that we have not given up," said Mitch Chan, who works in legal industry. "We're still fighting for what we fought for last year." So something was going on last year of 2019. And this was all of the protesters right here. And it says they're demonstrators that gathered in the luxury mall chanting pro-democracy slogans, and the latest in a string of protests over the past week. So people have even protested now here in California because they feel like their freedoms are being denied. Their freedoms are being denied to live as an American despite the pandemic fears and issues. So here in this country, They are fighting for independence and revolution from another stance. Also, there's some other things going on, and we're not totally being told about all of the details of this. What I'm saying is what I've noticed is there's a lot of little small pockets of protests that are cropping up. Here's the thing that I think is weird, which they've never really done this before. They're releasing a lot of people that have been incarcerated. They somehow got together these stimulus packages of money in these big, you know, planned packages and sent out money to various people. And some people didn't get it, and those that didn't get it, they're going to get it next go around, and then others didn't get it for whatever the reasons. But these are things that they normally don't do. Releasing people in jail, releasing people in prisons, releasing people from nursing care facilities for fear that the people are going to die of whatever this is. I feel like more is going on, more is at work here than what the general population knows. And we're not being told all of the details as to what is going on. So going back to this article, and I said I was going to be bouncing around, these people were holding up signs and calling for movements of 5 demands to be met. Ms. Chan said that she was not worried about possible transmission of the virus during the protests. These people are not afraid of getting sick because there's something they want to convey, a message that's important that they want to convey to their government and maybe to the world. Something we're not knowing, because the people of Hong Kong are disciplined and know how to protect themselves by wearing masks. Why is that? Police entered the mall about half an hour after the protest began, urging people to leave and warning that those that were assembled that they were violating social distancing rules and participating in all unlawful assembly. So the police detained several of the protesters, but later let them go with no arrests made. So the protest followed similar ones in the mall, and on Sunday and on Tuesday there was another protest, and in which the police dispersed the crowds again. So they are a continuation of a movement that began last June to protest. This was in 2019. The extradition bill. Let me say that. It's an extradition bill that would have allowed detainees in Hong Kong to be transferred to the mainland China. Although the bill was later withdrawn, the demonstrations continued with protesters demanding full democracy and independent inquiry into police behavior. Okay, so they're having problems with their police out there. Organizers are planning further protests in May, with an eye to a major march on July 1st and the day when Britain returned Hong Kong to China in 1997. So activists expect protesters to return to the streets again as the city's daily virus cases have dwindled to single digits for over 2 weeks. Adrian Wong, who works in banking, said that he came out to protest despite worries about the coronavirus. So I am concerned about the virus, but I think I still have to come out so that Hong Kong's people won't forget what happened in the last year, Mr. Wong said. The violence of Hong Kong police force is destroying Hong Kong. And the 5 demands have not been met yet. So they're extremely persistent about what it is that they're protesting and why they want their 5 demands met. And so, with all the civil unrest that is going on all over, it seems as though, people in fear that they're going to die. Some people are in fear that they're going to lose their livelihood, their money. They're going to lose their housing. There's so much civil unrest going on. in ways emotional and civil unrest going on in different parts and it's sparking in different parts. But this seems like it's a war going on. It's a war financially, emotionally. The people that have been dying, that have been hit the hardest, they have said that they were holding back the numbers. Most of them were black people. Most of them were Hispanic people that felt they had to work in the front and they had to pay their bills and rent. So they would work these jobs because they're in fear of losing what little they do have. And you're hearing that people who are living paycheck to paycheck, which they already were doing that before the pandemic, are in fear that they won't have anything left because the economy is pretty much in shambles. So the other thing that I have noticed is that China, they want to hold China accountable for the coronavirus. They even heard China should pay reparations for Americans' deaths. You don't believe it? Well, here's the article. A majority of Americans support reparations from China. Okay, so this went out April the 8th. More than half of the Americans think China should pay. And so there have been some states that wanted to sue China's government for this coronavirus. Most Americans think Chinese government should pay reparations for failing to prevent the coronavirus from becoming a pandemic. And so this was in an article, Washington Free Bacon. The Washington Free Bacon. A majority of Americans support reparations from China. Okay, so there's a lot of people that are upset because they've lost their jobs, and there's a lot of lives that have been lost. A lot of businesses that had to close down. Unlike national media, most Americans blame China for a coronavirus pandemic. And this is China's president here. Most Americans think that the Chinese government should pay reparations for failing to prevent the coronavirus from becoming a pandemic, according to a Harris poll published this week. A majority of respondents, 54%, said they agreed that China should be required to pay other countries for the spread of this virus. A majority of independent voters expressed support for Chinese reparations, and did 41% of the Democrats. And so the poll findings suggest that most Americans and most Democrats are not persuaded by the national media's efforts to downplay China's role in causing this pandemic, which in some cases has included the promotion of Chinese propaganda. So, for example, 77% of Americans and 67% of Democrats said China was responsible for the spread of the coronavirus. Almost as many Americans, 72%, said the Chinese government has not been accurately reporting information about the virus's impact in China. 66% of the Democrats agree. Donald Trump, President Donald J. Trump, efforts to impose tougher trade restrictions on China are also popular. So 69% of the Americans and 53% of Democrats say they support such policies. Even Trump's controversial use of the phrase China virus is seen as more acceptable than not. According to the poll, 52% of the Americans agree with Trump's characterization of the virus, while 48% disagree. And so that's one article that I found that has to do with the uproar of how people feel about China's dealings with this whole thing. And so there has been a lot of people that have expressed their disdain for how this thing had been downplayed, even on up to the point of the World Health Organization and Tedros, who is the head organizer of the organization, on how he praised China for giving them information about the numbers, which a lot of people feel they're not giving them the correct information about the true numbers of people that have died in China of the coronavirus and what is going on, period. in terms of the coronavirus. And so a lot of things are going on all over. China held accountable for coronavirus. Okay? US intel says virus is not man-made. That's what they say, still considers Chinese lab. So don't defend Trump attacked China. Republican memo reveals coronavirus campaign strategy. Okay, so there's a lot of people with mixed messages, a lot of stuff floating around. Asia Today, Australia capital, free of known virus cases. There's so many different articles having to do with coronavirus this and coronavirus that. China held accountable for coronavirus. Okay, so they're doing serious investigations. I've seen that. I had to lay out some of these things so that you see that most of them, if not, I say like 85 to 90% of these articles are pretty much pinning accountability that should be held on China for this outbreak. And I've heard that there are labs, like what I was saying way before, and that these labs were pretty much close to that Wuhan, if not in Wuhan, not very many miles away, and that there also were, even before this pandemic, sites, certain labs where they had been cited for their dealings of the viruses that they were handling and studying. These viruses that are coronavirus, they did have a study in one of those labs. I don't know if it was more than just, could have been more than one. And so I was reading about that and that they had cited them. And the way it goes is that when it has to do with American people coming over to another country to try to pretty much hold accountability for a lab such as the ones over there in that country, they pretty much do not want them involved. And what I was hearing is they do not want American people coming over there and meddling in what their affairs are, which raises a red flag. Did somebody accidentally do something they shouldn't have been doing? Or was it on purpose? That also is floating around. We should only wonder. But what is strange is that all of a sudden they want to give money to people. They're trying to figure out how to freeze the rents, which they did that. Now they're trying to talk about a sweeping bill because they know people are upset now because they know that at the end of these rent freezes and mortgage freezes, that once they lift them, people are going to be homeless. There's going to be a tsunami of debt. Some people have used credit cards to pay their bills ahead of all of this, thinking that maybe they would get some money to compensate it, and they haven't. So some people have already in the process started moving out in what is called ghosting their apartments. Basically, they're moving all of their things out because they don't want to be hit with an eviction, 30-day pay or quit or get out, and you have kids and you have a family and you need a place to stay. So they've already gotten themselves prepared to move, and they've started moving and emptying their apartment out, and they're just staying for the time being until they lift the freeze and tell people to leave. And then by the time they've gotten all their stuff out of there, when they do lift it, and if something bad news comes, they can say, I'm already out of my apartment and I'm not going to pay for that next month rent after the freeze, and I'm not going to pay the rent during the freeze of what they think is owed. And so that is what they're doing. They're ghosting these apartments. Some people have started doing that. And so people are already doing drastic measures. And another drastic measure that is going to come is a huge rent and mortgage strike, which is probably going to be a ripple effect in the housing market and all over the place. Before this pandemic, there was the issues of people paying the high cost of living. and already facing eviction, or they were already homeless. Some of these people are not homeless because they want to be homeless. Some of these people are homeless because they could no longer afford to pay their rent. Which brings me to this. Right here, what I'm looking at is there's something bigger at play going on here. You had the tariff that Donald Trump put on the Chinese goods. There's these, taxes that they put on there, that they had that pretty much put like a higher price on the goods that China wanted from here, or put a lock on, oh no, you can't get this from us unless you pay more money. And so then China then enacted their tariffs. And so there was this war, this trade war going on. And so you have all this fighting. And there's other things that we're not being told. Here you have these protests that went as far back as 2019, June, in Hong Kong, where people over there were fighting for their revolution and their independence. What was really going on over there? We shall only wonder. Was there even more going on that we didn't know? And then you got this doctor that was trying to warn us about this virus coming out. But they silenced him. And I heard there were professors and school administrators and staffers that were from those countries that were also trying to put out information, and they were silenced. Some of them even probably even threatened their life. So what are we really up against that we're not really being told is the question here in all of this. Oh, by the way, this is the president of China. And a lot of people, have seen him before. And so one while they said the president of China had disappeared. They said that the president, Xi Jinping, had disappeared when this virus had happened. And he didn't want anybody questioning him. So it said that China's Xi Jinping has not been in Wuhan amid the coronavirus. And that was February the 10th, 2020. And so Tedros Adhanom, the director of the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, shakes the hand of Chinese President Xi Jinping before the meeting at the Grand Hall of the People on January 28, 2020. And so when he did visit, it was, I believe, a lot later. Sounds like he waited. He waited to resurface. And I believe there were so many people that had questions and they wanted to know what was going on. And this was March 10th when I believe this article came out. Said that the Chinese president visits Wuhan in the major show of confidence as China turns corner on the coronavirus. It was like he kind of left in the middle of mayhem, and then he waited until things started to calm down a little bit. So the Chinese President Xi Jinping has made his first visit to Wuhan since the novel coronavirus outbreak began more than 2 months ago. The new cases of virus had slowed to a trickle in the country where the disease first had emerged. And so X's visit to Wuhan, which has been on lockdown for weeks now, this was back in March.
Alpha Romeo wants to help you drive forward with the ability to shop and buy safely online.
And it has one of those things, it's CNN, so it has videos, so I'm going to try to turn it down. I don't know if it'll play again. It says that with tens of thousands confirmed cases of the virus and hundreds of deaths, is a major show of confidence in China's response to the pandemic, underlying a message which has been building in the state's media that the country has turned a corner. And so, as of Tuesday, so this was back, I guess, in March, there had been 80,754 cases of the virus confirmed across China, and 67,760 of which were in Hubei province, which Wuhan is capital. It's the capital, so of 3,136 deaths that were confirmed in China, and 112 have been in Hubei. So at its worst, and so that was back. This paper was back in March 10th, 2020. And so we're now almost in the month of May. And so I'm going to click off of this because I think maybe there'll be another video. But I just wanted to see that there's a lot of things, a lot of question marks as to why all of this is going on. That is there something else that is happening that we as Americans are unaware of? There's so much discord, so much, uneasiness right now that we are not being told 100% everything. And now what we have in the news is Governor Gavin Newsom orders a hard close of state local beaches because there were thousands of people that flocked to the Orange County shorelines over the weekend in defiance of the state's stay-at-home orders. And now the beaches are being closed again. And so that's in the front page headlines. And so there are protests that are going on, and I'm hearing that some of these protests are beginning to get pretty serious and pretty lethal. There are some people that are becoming militant. And so that is what is scary. And, we have all kinds of famous people that are coming out and trying to support people. They're trying to do shows. They're trying to do, whatever, give up their show of support to try to calm crowds down, to make people feel like there's some bit of normalcy. But I believe that is just really, some of it is a show of support. Some people don't want people to become unraveled and give up. And then others have a fear that this could go a whole nother way. And it has for some. There are some people that are protesting and they're actually armed. I heard that's what's going on in Michigan. It's becoming violent. And some of these protests are becoming a little more aggressive, and they're building over time. And I believe it has to do with the livelihoods of people not having income and not being able to last through the lockdown. And then if they come out of the lockdown, how are they going to pay their bills? Because you have to look for a job. You have to know that your job will accept you back. Some of these jobs won't accept people back if you decided to stay home because you are afraid that you might contract this disease. And so that's the other issue. There's so many different things going on. So what are we not being told? Was this on purpose? Was this not just an accident that this virus was let out? And that is the growing question. We shall see how this develops in the meantime, but having said that, I'm going to let this video go. I just think that there's a lot of unanswered questions as to how this thing came about. It is said that it started in a wet market. How did it start in a wet market? What are these wet markets really about? Is it about maybe what I was talking about, how some of these people in these countries don't have a lot of independence and they're protesting because there's a lot of divide in these countries? Is it a thing of where there's some really rich people and some really poor people, and they rely on those wet markets so that they can make the income because there's nothing else that they do better, and they cater to the really wealthy folks that want to eat these exotic foods, and that's where they make their biggest income. And so that's why the wet markets were told to be closed down in a few of these Asian distributed papers in America, but now these wet markets are back up and running again. So that means we could face another virus or something else could happen again and get into the food population. And then next thing you know, somebody eats it, or get into the human population, rather, should I say, through somebody being infected again with yet another virus. Is it that simple, or is there something else going on? Was there a black market going on? Are the wet markets a front for organ donating, illegal organ donor businesses? Black markets for that. Black markets for also selling gamey food, things that are really not supposed to be eaten, wild animal that is against the law, but they get money and profit from that. Is there also trafficking of these animals going on? These are the questions that are rolling around. Is it somehow that maybe some of these animals that they tested in the laboratory that they might have injected these diseases with, did they somehow end up in the wet markets and people consumed them, and that's how it ended up in the human population? These are all valid questions, and these are the things that they claim that they are trying to investigate. China's government and what's going on over there, and then there's the regime that's over there. It's extremely militant and extremely punitive. They don't want Americans meddling in what is going on with their politics. Could it have been deliberate? Is there a black market for selling animals from the lab? Maybe somebody took extra money. I'll take all of the animals that you tested, that just give me the animals. I'll put them in the wet market and sell them off. Somebody that's trying to he's more concerned, just like the people here. They're not worried about dying of the virus. They're more concerned about having money. So does the same thing apply in these countries? They're more concerned about making their little money because they're in poverty, rather than the animals might have been injected with viral, diseases, or used as lab experiments, and somehow now they're selling them to people to eat. And they sell them to rich Americans, and they don't have any connection to the Americans to feel any kind of way about them, except they just want the money. And somehow somebody eats this, and now they're infected with this virus. And it goes from one person to the next person to the next person, and so on. This will happen again, I'm sure. Unless there's other things at play here. So I'm going to let this video go. I don't know if this is going to be of any good to you, but I question this every day, and the more and more I see the social divide that is happening, it seems like it's just unraveling. Day by day, you get news brief after news brief about how they tried all these medicines and vaccine probability that, this one will work and that one will work. And it's slowing the virus. Well, it won't be for long we have something else come out. If we have the same problems that we had before the virus here in America, there'll be more homelessness, there'll be more evictions, there'll be more people in poverty. Now this is just adding to the coal to the fire, as you would say. And then in these other countries, probably some of the same issues are going on, only it's just another country, different people dealing with different policies and politics that may be triggering them to protest. Social divides that they're having. So what is really going on in the population that they're not telling us everything? We're only getting bits and pieces. If you don't recall that they told us you don't need to wear a mask because a mask is not appropriate. You don't have to wear it unless you're sick. So all those people followed that rule and they got sick. And then they turn around and tell people, well, you need to wear a mask because it'll help keep some of the droplets off of you. Now I'm seeing articles saying that it could possibly be airborne. If you're in the right conditions, if you're in like a public bus or train, or you're in a hospital where they run the air condition and the vents are going, everybody's breathing in that recirculated air, and it's going in that person's nostril and out of that person's nostril, and you're breathing that air in constantly, and they're all getting the same particles of everybody's breathing, what's in their mouth and their nose. And if they're sick, now everybody else is going to be sick. That's the reason why most of the nurses and doctors are sick. The ones that aren't, or they're worried, or they're catching it, they don't even want to go home to their family, so they go to a hotel and stay there and shower because they're afraid they're going to bring the coronavirus home to their kids and their wives and their husbands and their whoever, loved ones. What are we not really being told? That is the question. Chinese president disappearing has not been in Wuhan amid the coronavirus. Hong Kong protest continues to regain steam. A majority of Americans want to hold China responsible for this initial outbreak. You can only wonder where this is going to end up. And now we have rent strikes that are going to happen amid this, what we're hearing, that the beaches are going to be closed. So rent strikes are going to happen. Believe it or not, a rent strike is on the way, and it is coming. New York is having a rent strike. LA is having a rent strike. Philadelphia is having a rent strike. Tenants and landlords brace for the largest rent strike in decades. So when was there ever a rent strike before? A rent strike? That's happened before. When did that happen? Let's find out here. There's a lot of those rent strikes that happen. When did that happen? So, looking here, there's histories of that. A rent strike's a method of a protest commonly employed against large landlords. A rent strike, a group of tenants that come together and agree to refuse to pay their rent in the masses until a specific list of demands are met by the landlord. When was the last rent strike? New York Times, 1919, there was a rent strike. You see that? There was a rent strike back then. And so it's going to happen again. And it's happening now. What they say, things that happened in the past tend to repeat themselves. Well, this is true. And so a rent strike is underway. And it is coming. Rent strike 2020. And it is coming. Rent strikes through the coronavirus pandemic, and it already is being posted. Many commercial tenants, notable retailers have called a situation a force of measure, as rationale for voiding lease agreements, although landlords still have to make mortgage payments. These include the Cheesecake Factory, mattress firm, Subway have refused to pay April's 2020 rent due to the pandemic as resulting of unemployment. And so in the UK, all eviction proceedings have been suspended and the 3-month extendable moratorium on new proceedings imposed. In addition, household assistance in various forms have been made available to domestic tenants, and support to landlords has been extended by way of the banks. And so some places like Arizona have tried to make provisions to help renters pay their rent, but that has not been the case for Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and New York. And so that is the reason why they are calling a rent strike to happen, because this has gotten so far out of control that people feel, even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from what is quote unquote the squad are strategizing to cancel rent payments. And tenants in the U.S. are planning the largest rent strike in decades. And so this is not from my mouth. This is what is going to happen. So they're planning the largest rent strike in decades as the coronavirus cuts off more than 30 million people from their incomes. And so this is what has happened all over. And so this is what we're seeing. And so housing organizers and tenants across the U.S. plan to hold a rent strike Friday. And here's the date, May the 1st. Landlords say that the rent strike would disrupt the entire financial ecosystem, but renters say they have no choice. Since the pandemic began, tens of millions of Americans have lost jobs, leaving them without a steady income. Without government intervention, we're looking at a huge wave of evictions coming down the road, said J.W. Mason. And so before COVID-19 virus, 70% of our income went towards rent, said Vanessa Bolnes, 61, her voice crackling over a Zoom call with housing organizers and media on Thursday. So like tens of millions of tenants around the country, Bolnes and her 71-year-old husband, who live in Oakland, California, are out of work. And even before the crisis, housing was not affordable. She said her husband suffered a stroke just before the 2009 financial crisis. She's been the sole breadwinner ever since. We've always been on the edge of homelessness, Bolnes said. So on Friday, May 1st, Bolnes will join the legion of tenants unable to pay rent, and it's not clear exactly how many renters will go on strike, but organized efforts in New York, Pennsylvania, California, Missouri, Washington State, and elsewhere point to the largest rent strike in decades. So we need our rent canceled, Bolnes said. We need forgiveness, and we need it now, and we need it gone. Millions of Americans face economically devastating bills and costs. This week, the Economic Policy Institute announced although some 26 million Americans have filed unemployment benefits since the crisis began, a number that rose to 30 million since the study was published, that number drastically understates the economic devastation in the U.S. A survey published on Tuesday. So the think tank found that 13.9 million other Americans are eligible for the benefits. A portion of those people applied but never had their documents processed. Others did not try to apply because it was too difficult to do so. In other words, only around half of the Americans who are eligible for benefits actually received them. So the Economic Policy Institute research signals looming economic pain for millions, according to Elise Gold, an EPI economist who co-wrote the study. People are going to have to pay their rent, their mortgage, and all of their other bills, Gould told Business Insider, and these weights are economically devastating for them. Already, the erroneous number of people haven't paid rent on time. This month, nearly 1 in 3 tenants did not pay their rent by the end of the first week of April. So this is what you're going to see and a lot more of it. Housing is a human right. Healthcare is a human right as well. And so this is what we're seeing. Eric McGregor, Pacific Press, White Rocket, via Getty Images. Okay, so landlords, however, say that the rent strike would just worsen economic conditions. A nationwide rent strike is counterproductive, Bob Pennegar, CEO of the National Apartment Association, told NBC News, but there's definitely growing concern, he said. So everyone anticipates that there's going to be distress, and it's going to be more than pronounced than April. So Doug Bigby, head of the National Multifamily Housing Council, which represents apartment owners and managers, called the rent strike reckless. And these people don't think that these things through, and they think that they're hurting and they're disrupting the entire. They are hurting and disrupting the entire financial ecosystem in doing this. So Bibby told NBC News this, and so they think that they're hurting the big bad landlord, but they're really hurting all kinds of people like themselves, and they're spreading the economic malaise more broadly in the economy. So advocates and tenants say that they have no choice in the matter but to make their voices heard through the rent strike. But advocates and tenants see it differently and disagree, so they don't have a choice of whether to pay rent, said Winsome Pendergrass, a housing organizer based in New York City since the 18th of March. I am not working, Pendergrass said on the Zoom call organized by a group of grassroots organization representing working class people led by an action center for race and the economy. So Pendergrass said that she managed to pay her landlord that month, but in May they're not going to get it. Not because she doesn't want to pay, because she can't pay the rent, she said. So policymakers need to help tenants. J.W. Mason, an economist at CUNY's John Jay College of Criminal Justice, told Business Insider. Otherwise, we're looking at a huge wave of evictions coming down the road, Mason said, praising Minnesota Representative Han Omar recent rent cancellation bill proposal, and that's an incredible socially disruptive process. So you see, people are already starting to feel the brunt of all of this. And a person walks past the words rent strike written in large letters on the side of a Compton Hill Reservoir wall Thursday, April the 2nd, 2020, St. Louis, with millions of people suddenly out of work, some advocating going on a rent strike until new coronavirus pandemic subsides. So the economic devastation will be most acute for Black and Brown communities. That is what the ACL has warned. Evictions, utility shutoffs will disproportionately harm communities of color, and particularly women of color. All residents, regardless of their circumstances or background, should have access to safe, stable housing throughout the course of the ongoing public health crises, said Sandra Park, senior staff attorney at the ACLU. So 17 states plus Washington, D.C., Guam, and the Virgin Islands have fully suspended eviction cases and enforcement, according to the research at Columbia University Law School and University of Pennsylvania Law School. So organizers and tenants praise the moratorium, and they also fear the day that they're gone. So the day that they're gone, and some are already gone now, and some will be gone at the end of May, my landlord may not be able to evict me right now, but when these things are gone, Tiana Caldwell, an organizer based in Kansas City, Missouri, said the media call, but what's stopping him from evicting us as soon as the moratorium lifts? That's the question. So I can't pay the rent, and it's not my fault, she added. So I need my governor and my federal government to use their extended power in this crisis to do their job and protect tenants and cancel the rent. And so that's pretty much what is going on here. It's causing a lot of social unrest to unravel as we speak. With that being said, I'm going to let this video go. So not knowing where this virus thing really is going and the uncertainty of all of this, and they're having all these famous people come out and schmooze you over with the comedy and with their shows, and they're telling you you can watch Netflix and you can watch all of these things and relax and go to places and get these food. But what about when these rent strikes come about, and when these rent freezes are over and these moratoriums end and these rent strikes start cropping up all over the place, which starts tomorrow, May 1st? What's going to happen then? How is that going to pan out? Is anybody going to want to laugh and look at comedy? Is anybody going to want to have their egos stroke? No. They want to know how you're going to help more than 3 million people figure out how they're going to pay their mortgage and their rent. Having said that, I'm going to let this video go. Thanks for listening.